So the French Civil War inches ever closer. So we've previously spoken about the fact that there was a letter published that was signed by, 20 generals, retired.
Well, a lot of them are retired.
Yeah, mostly retired, but they get the rank of general still. Some standing members of the military who were in trouble, by the sounds of it, for signing this. And it was a letter warning the French government, get control of Islamo-leftism and the spread of Islamism in France, or we're edging towards a civil war. I mean, pretty stern stuff. And, okay, yeah, I mean, this is what a lot of people have been warning for a long time with the way France has been going. And the response was, you can't say these things, you need to shut these guys up. And, yeah, okay, guys in the military, I can see the argument, but you can't ignore the threat. And I've only clicked today because Josh mentioned it. You notice how Macron suddenly changed his tune on the whole thing. It was like, no, Islamism's bad, Islamo-leftism needs to be crushed. And you've got to wonder whether or not his defense secretary was whispering to him about some words in the military that were going on. And then, okay, we'll change the government messaging.
Well, that is interesting, absolutely, isn't it? Why, when policy can come down from one individual, the leader of a country, and when they suddenly turn on a dime like that,
it's got to be a reason.
It's not for no reason. They haven't just suddenly woken up and had an epiphany out of nowhere. There'll be politics behind that for sure. And of course, we don't know, but what you just said makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it until Josh mentioned it, and I'm like, actually, yeah, that's probably true.
Yeah,
Anyway.
or maybe just the spin doctors were like, you need to be harder on this, otherwise you will lose at the next election.
Yeah.
Maybe it's more that, I don't know. Of course,
but,
I don't know.
there have been more developments. So I said there's a second letter published, but firstly I wanted to say that Michel Barnier, you remember him from the negotiations about Brexit, him representing the European Union, has suggested that France should suspend immigration for 3 to 5 years. Based. So he gave some interview on French TV, and I've had to rely on other people translating it because I don't speak frog. And he says in here, I'm not talking about students or refugees who we need to treat with great humanity and take care, but we need to examine all the procedures. We have to discuss Schengen with our neighbours, and we have to apply controls on borders. We need to be more rigorous. The problems of immigration are not moderate. I know, as a politician, I am to see the problems, how they are for the French people experience them, and to find solutions. Also, he warned of the terrorist networks which come within migratory flows, which the terrorists are infiltrating. I was like, okay, that's not bad. Like, you might think a little bit soppy in some areas, but no, I mean, he's literally saying, suspend immigration to 2 to 5 years maybe, because of the amount of problems we have in France. Also, we might have to discuss Schengen with our neighbours. I mean, this has happened previously, in which the members of the Schengen countries have suddenly decided Schengen doesn't apply and applied border controls. But also the threat from ISIS, which has been proven to be true, that they carried out, which is they would send terrorists with the migrant chains, and they have, and they carried out terrorist attacks. So, I mean, good that he's acknowledging that.
Well, talking about the Schengen area, I mean, they're touching on Frexit. Is that what people say? Frexit. So
I don't know what the mood in France is anymore. I think they might have given up on that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
But still, it's
Le
in
Pen
that
was no longer so leading,
that way.
But I don't know.
Right. Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah, but as for sort of suspending immigration into France, I mean, why not stop? Why stop there? Why not have a system of deportations of those that probably hundreds of thousands or millions of people that are there that shouldn't be?
Well, the French Interior Minister said exactly that, if you remember. I mean, this is kind of stuff that in British politics might be considered extreme, but we'll get into why France seems to be this way. And I think he said that if people oppose the drawings of cartoons in schools, we'll deport you. No discussion, you're getting deported.
Nice.
And it's like, okay, yeah, actually. I mean, what conversation are you going to have with that guy?
Yeah.
I mean, the parent you're talking to there is of the opinion that French society is evil. Like,
and investigate their local community or immediate family members. Why do they think that? What's gone on exactly? Why?
So
let's look into that exactly. What's gone on there? But okay,
that'll be the position of the French state. So I love how this is also very much like take back control. Like I love the guy for the EU here. It's like let's take back control of our borders, institute border controls. The terrorists are trying to use them. It's like if Nigel Farage had come out tomorrow before this guy and said let's suspend all immigration to Britain for 2 to 5 years. I mean, there'd be a cluster F, wouldn't they? People being mad about it. But anyway, so the second letter that I mentioned has been published. So this is France 24 reporting on it. So anger in France over civil war warning. So this is the second one. The government of French President Emmanuel Macron reacted with fury on Monday after a group of serving French soldiers published an open letter warning that civil war was brewing under brewing under his concessions to Islamism after weeks of similar messaging from elements of the military that rocked the elite.
Oh, he's angry. Oh,
So-
he's annoyed.
No,
Macron's annoyed.
The French, like, serving members of the military have signed this.
Yeah,
to say-
Macron was. He reacted with fury.
So-
Macron's got. He's angry about it, is he? Oh, that's rich. That's rich.
I mean, I do agree that the military shouldn't be making threats to the state under normal circumstances, but as we'll get into, France is not in a normal place and hasn't been for a while. So they say in here, in contrast to the previous message, the latest letter can be signed by members of the public. And the right-wing outlet that published the first letter has published a second one, saying that more than 160,000 people have done so since Monday.
So it does seem like it's the army and the people versus the government, almost. It's only the pro-EU globalists at the very top that seem to actively want more immigration from Muslim countries. The majority of the
Mass
people...
migration, yeah. I mean, I don't really know the situation in France. As I say, we're not French. We're not in tune with the political French scene, so we don't know how widespread this is or if it's a niche thing, but we can only see what we can see. But yeah, the absolute meltdown there. I mean, good God, you would not get this kind of thing in Britain in mainstream politics, but you do in France. So let's go to the letter itself. And again, I've had to run this through Google Translate because I don't speak French. And we're going to read it. If there's any mistakes, my bad, but that's all I can do. So I've taken out a few bits as well. We're not going to read the whole thing because, again, it's just way too long. And so it starts. These people who fought against all the enemies of France, the guys who signed the previous letter, you have treated them as factitious when their only fault is to love their country and to mourn its visible downfall.
Statement of fact, isn't it?
Statement of
Is
fact,
that not?
yeah. But they're literally just like, we need to save the country. We're going to be in civil war territory if you don't do something, Macron. You know, they weren't even asking for anything radical. They were saying enforce the laws we have. I mean, there's nothing radical about that. So, true. Under these circumstances, it is up to us, who have recently entered the career, to enter the arena simply to have the honor of telling the truth. So those who have entered the military, so as the previous article said, serving members of the military have published this.
Yeah, so it's different, really, isn't it? Like quite fundamentally different to just a handful of mostly retired to the actual army now, in some senses. That's
not small.
Things are ramping up there.
If this happened in Britain, everyone would be losing their minds.
Yeah,
But-
yeah.
Good God. So they continue. We are what the newspapers have called the fire generation. Men and women, active soldiers of all the armies and of all ranks, of all sensibilities. We love our country. In Afghanistan, Mali, Central African Republic, or elsewhere, a number of us have experienced enemy fire. Some of us have left comrades there. They offered their skin to destroy the Islamism to which you are making concessions to on our soil.
Again, seems factually correct, does it not?
How are you going to argue against that? It's like, well, why were we in any of those countries? To fight the Islamists. Why? Because Islamism's bad. You know, it's an awful set of values that makes, disgusting conditions. Okay, then why are we allowing this to take place in the mother country?
I think just moral and actual cowardice from the leadership. What else? What other reason is there?
I mean, that's,
other than someone like Macron is himself an Islamist, which he isn't. Obviously, I'm not saying he is. So, what other reason is there other than a type of moral cowardice?
I mean, this is what's been mentioned in the previous letter and in this one. We have laws, enforce them.
Yeah.
That's all that's being asked. It's like, it's not an unreasonable request. And the same thing has happened in Britain. Same thing has happened in Sweden and Germany. I mean, endlessly. I mean, the United States and the North Americans have been spared most of the absurdities that have happened in Europe and Britain. So they say in here that in response to saying we've all fought in these countries to fight Islamism, almost all of us have known Operation Sentinel. So for people who don't know, Operation Sentinel is why there are French soldiers all over France still. So you remember in 2015 there were a series of terrorist attacks, and in response, a state of emergency was declared in France, and 10,000 soldiers were sent to defend French, tourist areas, places of interest, places that would be subject to terrorist attacks.
Anywhere. Cafes, stadiums,
Cafes.
the street.
Yep. I mean, literally nowhere was safe, and they are still there. If you go to Paris, I went to Paris a couple of years ago or something now, and yeah, you just walk down the street and you see soldiers everywhere with rifles in their uniforms. I mean, like you're in an occupied state or something. It's not normal at all, and that's how they live. And I, as a foreigner going there, I was just like, this is nuts. This is not normal at all. So, just want to say in here, so it was in response to, and we're going to list some of them. I can't list them all by name or anything because I don't have the knowledge all the time. So it's Charlie Hebdo happened. There was a hostage crisis that took place. 2 shootings. There was the kosher siege. So it was a kosher supermarket in which there was a siege in which 17 people were killed and also 3 terrorists were killed. And then it expanded after, in November 2015, there were coordinated attacks all over Paris. So there was the football stadiums, which you might remember. There were 2 guys who turned up and suicide bombed themselves. There were also shootings of people at cafes who were just out drinking coffee. And then there was the Bataclan massacre. And if we can get the first image up, I mean, this is something we've shown before, but to really get the point home, France has not had a good time. Really not a good time of these last few years in terms of terrorism. I mean, it looks like a country that has been terrorized successfully, because it's not a normal place by the looks of it. And I mean, you know, look at the UK. We've had serious problems, and we just pale in comparison for the numbers of deaths.
Well, don't they in France quite often get lots of church killings?
Yeah, just random people. Like there was a priest who was beheaded by a boy with his penknife. And he killed him and then just cut off his head.
And then they'll just go into a church and there'll be some really old people in there.
Yeah, some nuns.
Yeah.
Kill the nuns. It's like,
And
why would you target a nun?
well, there's theological reasons, aren't there? But no one wants to talk about that.
Yeah, almost all of this. I mean, this isn't the far right or the far left. It is the Islamists. It is the Islamists carrying this out. It's not rampant crusaders. And we're going to go through the Bataclan massacre. So if you've got kids in the room or something, I'm just going to say put on some headphones because this is going to get pretty grim.
It's
and I'm not
about as dark as it gets,
Yeah.
really, isn't it?
I'm not going to do this for no reason. The reason I read through this, I went through the parliamentary inquiry, and I've cut out some bits that I'm going to read of what happened. Because I don't just want to gross you out or something. I want to try and explain this letter. And again, I'm not French, I don't understand the political scene there. But to look at a society that is radicalized to the point where you've got members of the military and retired generals calling for a coup. I mean, it's weird. And I want people to maybe understand why it is. So, in Bataclan was the theatre in which there was a rock band playing, and part of those coordinated attacks, so there were 2 guys who tried to gain entrance to a football stadium and then blew themselves up. There were the people who were shot in cafes, and then this was the third big thing of the night. I mean, all at the same time. It was hell to look at. I don't mind living there. So the 3 French natives, I mean, that's something to keep in mind. The terrorists here.
They're Frenchmen.
They are actually Frenchmen. They are citizens.
They're completely French. Sure.
But they are French citizens. That's the thing. It's a homegrown problem. It's not something of just immigrants. It is you're having people radicalized on your soil that you can't just deport. I mean, this is something you really got to get down into the neighborhoods to deal with. So they got out of their car outside of the Bataclan and decided to open fire on everyone inside. They were screaming Allahu Akbar as they did it. So presumably, I don't know, the far right. Rows of people were mown down in gunfire or were forced to drop to the ground to avoid being shot. Survivors described hundreds of people lying beside on top of each other in pools of blood, screaming in terror and pain. The gunmen also fired into the balconies. The dead bodies fell down onto the stores below for a few minutes. The hall was plunged into darkness. With only flashes of the assault rifles, the gunmen kept shooting. The terrorists shouted that they were there because of French airstrikes against the Islamic State. If you bomb the Islamic State, you'll make an enemy of these people. A radio reporter attending the concert described the terrorists as calm and determined. He said they reloaded 3 or 4 times. The gunmen attacked the concert hall. One gunman would cover his fire while the other reloaded to ensure maximum efficiency. I mean, these guys were trained. They knew what they were doing. According to the survivors, the terrorists walked among those who were lying down, kicked them, and shot them in the head if there was any signs of life. When the police arrived, they took hostages. The hostages were then threatened. They then threatened to execute the hostages unless they received a signed paper promising France's departure from Muslim lands. That was their demand. Leave all Muslim lands and we're going to kill the hostages. Not a negotiation. No, that's not going to happen. So it went to a shootout. And of course, the police then ran in. I mean, the heroic police. I mean, I've seen the pictures you showed me of like the police with the bullet holes all over their shields. They ran in, shot the guys, got the hostages out. One of the guys just died. He was shot to death. The other 2 blew themselves up with their suicide vests. I mean, really horrific. But we're going to get into why they are not just average terrorists. These guys are barbarians. So if you can go to the parliamentary inquiry, I went to the parliamentary inquiry and just Google translated it and then read through what I could, and it's not great. So again, I mean, if you've got kids, put some headphones on.
I mean, it's an insult to barbarians to call these guys barbarians.
They're on another level of barbarian. So the presumably some parliamentarian is interviewing this guy called Mr. PT. He says, Mr. PT, can you tell us how you learned that there had been acts of barbarism inside the Bataclan? Beheadings, eviscerations, accumulations. I don't even know how to say that word. After this, so Mr. PT responds, after the assault, we were with colleagues at the St. Pierre Amelot passage, where I saw the investigator come out in tears and then who had to go and vomit. He told us about what he saw. I didn't know this colleague, but he had been so shocked that it came out naturally. So he responds, did you see acts of torture on the second floor? Mr. PT responds, I think so, because I entered the ground floor level where there was nothing like it, only people hit with bullets. So on the ground floor, they opened fire, and then they went upstairs and they tortured people. And he gives this quote, and this quote is disgusting, but it's a quote which I'm going to have to read because I don't think it deserves to be unread. So the father of one of the victims sent me a copy of a letter which he transmitted to the examining magistrate, which I quote in summary. Quote, on the causes of the death of my son at the Forensic Institute of Paris, I was told, and this with reservations given the shock that it represented for me at that moment, that his testicles had been cut off, that they were put in his mouth, and that they had disemboweled him. When I saw him behind the glass lying on the table, a white shroud covering him up to his neck, a psychologist was accompanying me. The letter said, the only visible part of your son is the left profile. I found that he no longer had a right eye. I made the remark. I was told that they had gouged out his eye and sunk into the right side of his face, resulting in very significant bruises. That's what we saw when we put him in the coffin. I mean, that's what you're dealing with. I mean, these are not just barbarians. They are the worst kind of barbaric scum. And they carry out this sort of thing in Paris, killing hundreds of people. I mean, you've seen for the last 5 years, I mean, there is no country in Europe that has suffered worse.
Oh, but Hollande said it was a religion of peace, though, didn't he? Didn't David Cameron Obama echo that as well? So...
Yeah. Anyway, so let's go back to the letter, because, I mean, that's the context of this sort of thing. And I didn't read that for no reason. I read it so I could hopefully explain the whole thing of why are we looking at the military claiming we need a coup? And it's not just the terrorism, of course. There are the social issues. There are the riots. There is the inability of women to go out in certain places. There is the cultural conflict, shall we say. But they continue, the soldiers who wrote this letter. Yes, our elders are right about the substance of their text, in its entirety. We see violence in our towns and villages. We see communitarianism taking hold in the public space, in public debate. We see the hatred for France and its history becoming the norm. It may not be for the military to say that, you will argue. Quite the contrary. Because we are apolitical in our assessments of the situation, it is a professional observation that we deliver.
Not a moment too soon, or a bit late, you might even say.
They finish. Yes, if a civil war breaks out, the army will maintain order over its own soil, because it will be asked to. It is even the definition of a civil war. No one will want such a terrible situation. Our elders know more than us. But yes, again, civil war is brewing in France, and you know it perfectly well. Take action, ladies and gentlemen. This time, it is not about custom emotion, ready-made formulas, or media coverage. It is not a question of extending your mandates or conquering others. It is about the question of the survival of our country, of your country. I mean, it's unbelievable language. I've never seen a petition written so, beautifully and emotionally on a point in which you can just see, I mean, in the context of what France has experienced. It doesn't even look crazy. It doesn't look radical at all. It looks exactly what you would expect. I mean, if this sort of thing had happened in Serbia, you know, like what you would be expecting would be utter barbarism in response. And in the circumstances, the French seem to be acting as civilized people could.
Yeah, unbelievable restraint in many ways. I suppose if some of the concepts that are sort of at the heart of the French experience, one way to put it, liberté, égalité, fraternité, freedom, equality, brotherhood of man, all those things, they're mostly incompatible, it seems, with the main tenets of Islam.
Entirely. I mean, Tony Blair has said as much. You don't even need to take some right-winger's word for it. Like, Tony Blair has said millions of Muslims hold views that are incompatible with the Western world. It's just a factual observation. Islamism can't exist with liberalism. It just can't mesh. I just wanted to mention the last thing there. That petition that we mentioned, I just checked. So it was yesterday. It had 1.9 million unique visitors to that, and it had 250,000 signatures from the public.
Right.
And as mentioned, the original signatories presumably being members of the current army, because they're writing that in that tone.
Isn't it in their national anthem to for citizens to be called to arms, to form barricades if necessary?
Yeah.
All that sort of thing's quite heavily ingrained within the French psyche, I thought. Well, it seems to be. So, well, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm not trying to shock you. I'm not trying to be gross. I want to explain the context and hopefully put some light onto why they're in this situation. And I mean, I've seen Douglas Murray talk about it before, in which he says that, okay, give them some slack. I don't care what they're saying. They're still being unbelievably civilized considering what they've gone through. And he's totally right. I mean, just read what's happened, and you're like, okay, most other countries would have done completely uncivilized things in response. The French have been nothing but civilized in their response. And let's see if they actually enforce the law or if things just get worse, I guess. But that's how France is.
If you enjoyed this segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can watch the full broadcast live every weekday at 1 p.m. UK time on lotuseaters.com.